be recording today as Jan Weirson cannot make it. Football is here. Seth. And Tim, are you in Taiwan, in Taipei?
Yes.
You are, okay.
Brenda and I are in the same country.
Yes, but you're in Taipei, correct?
Right. She's a couple hours south of.
Yeah, okay. I thought I was trying to make the connection with her. She didn't know a Kalen Spencer. You know, he's at Friendship Church.
Actually, he has his own church now in Sanchong, which is the church plant. Yeah,
Brenda, we're trying to figure out how to get him ordained digitally. He's in our presbytery.
We're doing that with Peter Kim right now at Friendship.
All right, yeah.
We're going through the Northern California Presbytery for Peter Kim.
And you'll be doing it digitally?
I think so. I'm not the main. I'm not actually a member of Northern California. Tim Conkling is, and he's also here in Taiwan. So he kind of is the contact there. But
yeah. All right. Well, good. We have everyone. Jan Weirson couldn't make it, so I'm recording. I am getting the message that my internet is unstable, so hopefully this will work. And you know, not much we can do about it. I'm right now somewhere else. I brought my backdrop with me because I'm at Gulf Shores, Alabama, and having the beach shot isn't quite as conducive to the seriousness of the issue. No, I brought it because I also tomorrow I do a webcast for M&A and I really wanted some consistency for that, so got it set up for that. Well, great. Well, thanks for joining in for our second time. And okay, yeah, that's fine. If you're having problems, you know, coming in and out, I don't know. Hopefully it's not on my end. So we'll see. Well, let me pray, and we can get underway. Our loving Father and our gracious God, all thanks and praise belongs to you, for you have made us, and we are yours. And so guide us, Lord, at this time as we talk and consider what mentoring is and how it can be done in different formats and ways, that we would see health and growth among those with whom we work, leaders in your church, for the expansion of your kingdom. For it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Well, again, thanks. From last week, was able to get actually, after we were done, made some changes to the manual with the hardware, software conversation, hard skill, soft skill. That kind of helps flesh things out better, and I certainly do appreciate that. Well, I just jump in and looking at the this aspect that we were talking about from before. 1 second, make sure I'm getting my screen set up so I can see y'all here. One of the things we were talking about, the different definitions. One of the names on that list you had was David Clutterbuck. He has a long history talking about mentoring, much more so in the corporate context. But with that, he's been a real helpful and insightful person. He has this acronym. I'm not sure the acronym itself is all that helpful, because an acronym is only as helpful as you can remember what each of the letters mean. And this doesn't quite have the intuitiveness of it. But it does, again, hit some of the things we were talking about relationships. There's nurturing. It's a two-way street. There's a mutuality in this kind of context, which, as we're going to look today, we're going to make some comparisons between coaching and mentoring. Both are very wonderful, valid, important, so it's not an either or, nor are those terms interchangeable. And that's really going to be the one thing we'll be looking at there. And so with that, want to kind of, again, review what we were talking about, the NXTGEN definition, that being a gospel-guided relationship between an experienced pastor and those seeking direction, focusing on the development of soft skills with a view towards pastoral health. And with that, that understanding, we're going to begin to talk about how this actually operates, because not all mentoring contexts are the same. And so what I seek to do here is have a degree of flexibility in the whole context. But here's the challenge that I've seen, especially, again, I'm thinking especially in the context in which I'm working here in the States, in the PCA. So I'm working out of my own context, but I think some of this can be quite universal. It's in this context of pastoral formation. Right now, especially in the States, but I guess also with Third Mill and other options, we've really got good academic options, seminaries, training, whatever that may be. Am I frozen? Can you hear me? Am I okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good.
You're
All right.
through loud and clear.
It said unstable, and you all look frozen. I don't know if you were just sitting politely or what. So internships, we have, again, here in the States, we've got opportunities for them to learn, places for them to learn, churches wanting to engage. What we really don't have is an intentional integration of the two, that it's not one or the other, but it's actually what I would call a third leg of the stool. And that is in this area of character formation. And so with that, wanting to say, okay, what does it look like? How can it operate? So it's this third leg of pastoral formation. And again, as I'm talking in this context of pastoral formation, it operates too, obviously, in any sort of leadership context. And again, I know some of you have been talking about, okay, how will this work with just other staff and what have you? I think in working in any ministry context, this is an important component. Now, with this, what I see is really a three-stage model that's involved. So I talk about formation, development, renewal. That that these next-gen cohorts will move along in a process, and understanding each stage has its own unique aspects. The material can work in every stage. The mentor, and over time, becomes more of a facilitator, if you're talking, because this formation stage is what I would call the academic preparation. This is the earlier stage. Now, there is one of the next guys who went through the training who's looking at doing this probably even more for college age or college age students before they even go to seminary, which would be great. Then I would add a fourth stage of discernment. They're really figuring out what is it they want to do. They want to go into ministry or something like that. But for our sake, I'm talking about formation is the seminary part of it. The development is the early pastoral engagement, and then renewal is later in life. The reason being, when I started in Wisconsin, I had the guys who were starting in seminary, and there were also guys who had just graduated, and they were apprentices in our presbytery. And I try to put them all in the same group and talk about these things. And I had a flashback to early years in my church plant when I combined the junior high and the senior high youth together. The senior high, they were too cool for school. They didn't want to be with dorky, 13-year-olds. And so they just didn't engage. And I was watching these guys post-seminary go, yeah, I don't need this. And I'm thinking, you really do, you just don't know it. And so by kind of putting them in a group, each in their own group, I was more able to gear the mentoring to that group. So this formation, and it works whether it's brick and mortar, a hybrid, or a fully non-traditional form of preparation. In fact, the less traditional it is, the better. There are a little bit in the seminaries, but more so in the students. They think if I'm physically on a campus, I don't need anything else because I can get all that I need by sitting in a seminary classroom. I'm trying to work on changing that because I think there is something more. This usually takes up through, first 5 years or so. If you do a hybrid or non-traditional form, it will take longer to get through formation through your seminary. What I find in this group is they're much more receptive because they know their need. They know that we know that they don't know anything, and they're therefore much more likely to want to hear the other voices in their lives. It is a little bit harder when you get to development because, and I'll address that in a minute. Part of it is I want them to understand, I make this point when I'm dealing with them in formation while they're preparing for ministry, that what we're doing is pastoral ministry. That this is not preparatory for ministry. This is what you need to be doing from now on. So when one of my guys said, as he was wrapping up his seminary education, he said, I'm going to miss meeting with guys like this on a regular basis. And I said, if you stop doing this, I will come and beat you. And if I am dead, although I theologically would not approve of myself doing this, my ghost will come and haunt you until you get back in a group. But I want them, it's hard to get people to start later in life doing something they hadn't done before. If I get them started now and say, this is what it always looks like, I think it can help. Development end of things. Here, these often are more affinity based. The problem in starting at this point in life is that it's true of every profession. Once you've paid money, gone through education, and have been credentialed in whatever profession it is, it's really hard to think I need something else. It's an admission of something is insufficient. And so it's hard to get guys right out of seminary to do this. I worked with one fellow once. He was just out of seminary and he was going to preach. And I just said, well, I'd like to see your sermon and the work you're doing in your sermon that you're going to be preaching. And he just quickly informed me that was not necessary because I need to understand he had been trained by one of the best preachers around, and any input I have would be superfluous. And it was that kind of thinking that got me realizing it's hard to grab them once they have the education done in a lot of our contexts. So again, they're often resistant because they've achieved certain milestones in the whole process. Then as far as renewal goes, likewise, there are those important aspects of usually by about year 3 to 5, we hit a wall and kind of I need something else. And a lot of these renewal cohorts that we have, they are one is made up of assistant associate pastors, giving them space to be able to work with others, or church planters getting together because they have some similar issues. But I've got 1 or 2 that are renewal cohorts that are solo pastors, often in a rural context. It just is some help along those kind of lines. So, and as you go through this process, the other part of that then is it's much more, it's more facilitating and mentoring. So some of these groups, the guy whose person's been trained in this and is actually the mentor might be younger than the other people. There are a group I'm in Wisconsin, the guy's 20 years my junior, and it's great being part of it. He is more facilitating the conversation because there's shared experience, which is great. So it has that kind of movement back and forth. Any questions with that? Does that kind of make sense in the process? Feel free to unmute.
Chuck or Chris.
Yeah.
Chris, can you explain the you were talking about the cohorts being affinity based? What can you give an example of that?
Yeah, it would be more like having all associate or assistant pastors together, church planters, solo pastors, rural pastors. For example, I would not put multi-staff in the same cohort because you want the cohort, you want the freedom, the transparency to be able to share and a mutual understanding. I wouldn't put a guy who's been in ministry 25 years with a guy that just got ordained. Now, again, sometimes it happens and it's not the end of all things, but usually then it's dominated by the seasoned guy, or the seasoned guy goes, I don't need this. What can I learn from this kid? Which is unfortunate, but it's just part of it as well. Same thing if you were doing, again, I'm working in the PCA context as I'm talking more and more to other denominations, especially if they're egalitarian. So you could have all pastors together, and it certainly would be your, choice if you were to have men and women leaders together. My hesitancy would be more sociological than theological. It would be, men act differently when they're in a group with women involved. Their issues of transparency aren't quite the same. Either they just sit there quiet or they dominate. It's just not the same dynamic. So that would be some of it too.
So the affinity could be like similar to a Paracleo group of church planting wives meeting together, or non-TE for mentoring, because we have lots of women on our fields, and many men who are also not ordained. So any of those, would they be affinity groups?
Yeah.
Also?
Yeah, anything like that. Now, some of the modules, and aren't too many right now, talked a little bit with Paracleo about this, developing some modules when dealing with that one soft skill of marriage and family. So, if you're in a cohort and you've got, married and single, and you're going to talk about marriage, kind of figuring out how to work that out. But in that, with our guys who are preparing for ministry, not entirely, but largely in the PCA, at those points, I want the couples back together. So we would do more of a couples retreat or something along those lines. So there's some fluidity in that context too. Any other questions? Okay. All right. And again, as always, feel free to stop. And if it's hard to get my attention, do a hand raise type of thing. We'll see how that works. Shifting gears a little bit, as we're talking about mentoring, and I'm talking about these in these different contexts and ways, kind of want to pose a question. This comes out of some studies that have been done on the issue of, of how we balance and work together. And this will come up again as we talk about andragogy or adult-centered learning on the fourth week. But if you were to take these three categories and divide your time and work with somebody between instruction, their practice, and the feedback that you give, I can ask it two ways. How much time normally is given to each of those? How much time do you think should be given to each of those? So it all depends on how you view the question. So what are your thoughts? What percentage of time to instruct, what percentage in practice, what percentage for feedback?
I would say typically the 80%. Typically, I think you would need to have more realistically for practice and feedback, but that's just been my experience.
Okay.
I would say it's
Sorry,
probably
Chris.
pretty similar to how we as the PCA deal with even our preaching, where it's majority instruction, if I could say that, but it's similar to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need more feedback, more practice.
Okay.
I think that when it depends on where you are in the mentoring process,
Mhm.
maybe at the beginning, a lot more instruction, and then as you go on, more practice and finish might be different.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, I agree. I would agree with that. I was just thinking how maybe the instruction might be 30%. This is probably not right, but 30%, and then practice and feedback split up the rest of the 70%. Because I think, again, I mean, we see people coming to our field and just getting their feet wet with church planting, and they want so much more feedback once their feet are starting to get wet, and how important that is at that point, and that even all those things that are in their heads are not on the ground until they're on the ground. And I feel like the instruction doesn't have as much meaning until the other two are kind of happening side by side.
The more open to feedback and learning once they struggle a bit, it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris, did you mention that we're talking about adults here, right?
This is adults. Yeah. And it, I don't want a brain surgeon to start with practice and get feedback and then get some instruction after he's lost a couple patients. There's a lot of instruction that should go on before. So, and you'd adjust it by an awful lot in some of these areas. With that said, there a lot of studies, this gets to adult-centered learning, is that they're really finding that for the best learning really is on-the-job training. Once we hit the age of 25, the frontal cortex is formed. Our ability to just acquire knowledge for its own sake greatly decreases. Memorization goes down. And our best way of learning is actually doing. So this comes from a number of studies. This one in particular, what I was based off, not this graphic, but it's the same information from Catherine Hinkey, talks about the 7-20-10 model, that a lot of times they're saying we really need to learn, we need to do 70%, and that the instruction is very minor. Now, again, if you work in the context of Japan, you've got to learn the language. You got to be instructed. But you also know language acquisition, it takes place best through practice, through failing forward, if you will, not just in a classroom context. So that's somewhat what we're getting at here, that giving people the freedom to learn in the context of doing and failing and getting feedback and then getting instruction where they need it. So yes, mostly in an adult, really is an adult context. And again, you got to be careful. Again, somebody says, I feel called to the ministry. Well, let's start practicing preaching, getting up on every Sunday morning. I wouldn't do that. But what are the places in which I can give them an opportunity to do actual on-the-job training with that? Any thoughts or feedback? I'll give you 20% time for feedback on this.
Yeah, I agree. The doing is where you learn the most. You fail, which is a problem with our seminary model in some ways, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
Seems as you do stuff, fail, you just learn more and you're more receptive. So
yeah. A case in point, this comes from a classroom, was one of our guys, they were taking a Christology class at RTS, and one of our guys started to, talking about the impeccability of Christ and could Christ have sinned? And he said, yes, he could. He was arguing that is the case, which is outside of the historic Orthodox position. What became a formal learning context became on-the-job training. And so it ended up as a joke in the class. It was good natured and he took it as a joke. His name on the blackboard was Curtis the Heretic. I guarantee you, because of that, he will never get that wrong again. And so he finally understood, okay, I understand. But it was through that feedback. It wasn't just being told this is orthodoxy wasn't enough for him to actually grasp it. He had to engage it. And then his arguing on the job theologically, he found himself, okay, yeah, I see where that's incorrect. Now, we don't always have those opportunities in formal learning context. Especially if you're in a classroom of 60 people and you got to just take a test. So yeah, all of that I think helps us kind of recognize, what we need to be doing more. And it is an important part of that context for us. So another thing to think about, I believe this is on your sheet. This gets to kind of, again, the need, and we're kind of floating around some of these concepts at this point, but it is, okay, so if 20% feedback, which includes mentoring and coaching and some other things, what is the, what do we see as far as the success rate or the health rate? This is a Barna poll, and where they found, the greater number of times someone is meeting with a mentor or even peer spiritual support, what's the risk metric? And again, this really should be kind of a no-brainer, but this kind of captures it in numbers, that you can see how high spiritual risk is if it's just several times a year or not at all. Likewise, burnout rates among clergy. It's just, if you're meeting several times a month, it's not that high of a burnout rate. If there is a frequency, if there isn't frequency, the burnout rate increases. Same thing with just having other relationships. If you're engaged in some sort of community, it is so much more healthy in that context.
Chris, you able to hear me?
I'm sorry?
Hey, can you hear me, Chris?
Yep.
Yeah. Let's go back a minute if we can. I almost, it's not really a question as much as it is a comment, but I'm struggling to put together the pieces of the conversation. So we got a three-legged stool, and the seminary training or an instruction portion that we were just analyzing in a ministry context. I mean, that's vital, that's important, and that's like its own leg.
Mm-hmm.
When you raise the question about us as mentors doing instruction versus coaching or versus feedback, or whatever the three things were, you've moved the slide.
Yeah.
I almost thought that's a separate question. Like, we're not doing seminary level instruction. We're talking about doing a third leg of the stool.
Right.
And I almost find saying a moment ago is not appropriate, because to do ministry, you got to have that level of knowledge to be able to be effective in ministry. Once you've obtained it, or even as you're obtaining it, you're being mentored through that. At least that's the three things. You had a mentoring through that process, a mentoring through practicing those skills as a licensure or an apprentice, and then an ongoing mentorship, or at least a colleague mentorship post that, like for the rest of ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm just trying to bring some clarity.
Yeah.
You can tell me if I'm way off base, but
Yeah.
it just seems like we were talking about different things than what you were presenting to us. If we're going to be mentors and trying to structure appropriate time for instruction, appropriate time for feedback, and what the third thing was.
Mhm.
That's not about seminary instruction at all. That's about us as mentors leading those under us through the phase where they are
Mhm. All right.
in ministry.
So when you're, when you're serving, if you're serving as a mentor to somebody in formation, they are getting, and I'm finding in my context, they're getting good academic preparation. That's not my job. Now, that doesn't mean I'll speak to them in the context of theology and that, but the burden of their language acquisition, theology, knowledge of scripture in the particulars is not my area, or my chief concern. My chief concern is, how is their heart doing? How are they engaging the gospel in the midst of that process? The challenge is, especially in an American context, if they go away to seminary and it's hard to engage in a church. My son-in-law went to a great seminary, but was never able to preach during seminary. He did an internship, helped with a Saturday evening service, set up tables for luncheon and such, did a little teaching, but not much, because the town was so full of seminary students that if you talk about three-legged stool, he had the academic, which was good. He got some internship opportunities, but he would have graduated and only preached in a preaching lab and would have been able to be ordained with, 5 sermons or so under his belt. The one thing he didn't get was really had the opportunity for that third leg, which is being in a mentored cohort context through the process. So I'm seeing the role here of this cohort in the mentoring is, while they're doing the heavier instructional end, to always having this processing. Sometimes that processing takes place while they're doing the academic, if they have an opportunity to do an internship, which is great, but that the pastor under whom they're serving is a supervisor, and he can do some mentoring, but sometimes it's hard, because as the person who's in formation in seminary is doing the job, they need to have that hierarchical relationship. If you don't perform according to the standards we expect, you will not get hired, you will not get a good job review. The mentor needs to be able to be a little bit more detached from that whole process. So yeah, in the context, so I'm not in any way advocating lessening the academic and replacing it with mentoring. I'm just saying we need them to be simultaneously engaged with the academic and the supervising pastor where they're interning. Does that help bring some clarity, Andy?
Well, yeah, I mean, I thought that's what we were talking about, but then when we were giving our feedback, what I was hearing from my fellow attendees was commingling of all of that stuff, rather than looking at our role as the mentor in the midst of those things. So if I'm looking at myself as a mentor to someone who's already in an academic process, what's my role there? I'm not going to be doing 70% instruction to them. They're already getting that on the other leg of the stool.
Right.
My job is going to be to listen more and to give them opportunities to practice within whatever ministry context that we're in. Right. That's a part of the challenge with this particular group. We got folks, in lots of different ministry contexts. So what they're hearing, I think, sounds different to them. But I just wanted to bring back, you're talking about us being mentors.
Right.
Which that's not the seminary leg. So how are we going to be providing those three things? And I guess I was of the opinion that maybe they ought to be more 33, and 33%, so that you can do some of that 70% on the job training kind of thing.
Yeah.
But
I guess keep in mind the percentages, it is a bit more subjective, not necessarily the amount of time specific, although that could be debated, in that especially in a Western context, we think the academic is sufficient for all preparation too often. or we treat it as such. I've sat in a classroom, I've mastered the material. When actual mastery, I'd say in any context, is going to be in the doing of it, in that sense. And again, we're talking about adult learning here. So in these mentoring contexts, whether in seminary, just out of seminary and starting ministry, or even long term, yeah, our role is to provide those as mentors, is to provide that 20%, making sure even that is there. Because oftentimes I'm finding it's not. A lot of guys can get ordained in ministry, and I will ask them, so tell me about how did you prepare in the fullest sense of the word for ministry? And it was basically, I got good grades in seminary, which is wonderful, but that doesn't make them necessarily equipped to serve. So, who walked you through it? Who gave you feedback? Who's critiqued your sermons? Who has sat in on leading a small group and said, great job here, but hey, you might want to think about this. If that's not there in any form of the process, I think we're going to have long-term problems. So we speak in, we find where in that person or group's life can we have that opportunity. So no, I think that's a great question. Thanks. All right. Well, so we've talked about this idea of mentoring. Want to move a little bit to coaching, because a lot of times we can mistakenly combine the two, because there are some definite similarities between them. We talked about last week about Telemachus and what the word mentor comes from. Well, it really there's a similar story with the idea of a coach. As a kid, I remember in 1968, my dad bought a brand new Chevy Capri wagon, and I can still picture it in my mind. We drove across the United States for a month in that station wagon, and on the back door, the floorboard, there was this kind of chrome plate, and it had this emblem on it, "Body by Fisher," which made no sense. This was a Chevrolet. What's that mean? And Fisher, with Chevrolet, did the body work. And it was originally called Fisher Coach Works. The word coach comes from, it's either Czech or Hungarian, now I forgot. I think Hungarian, town of Koch in what is now Hungary. And Koch was known to be that in that town, they were the premier carriage builders. And so just like a lot of products, the name of one product becomes the name of the whole thing, so a facial tissue is a Kleenex. You make a copy of something, I don't know if we still do it anymore, we say you Xerox it. So a coach from that town, because they made the best carriages in Europe. Well, so this idea of a coach would be something that would carry you from point A to point B. Get to the early 1800s, and in Cambridge and Oxford, sometimes they called their tutors coaches, because they carried them from no knowledge to pass their exams. By the late 1800s, the idea of coaching in an athletic context, as the whole movement of athletics began to grow as part of a pastime, and having coaches for different sports took off. Well, obviously, you have that picture of a coach helping the team move from point A to point B. Well, again, now the term is still being used of those who help, bring someone from one point to the next. And so when we compare those two, it's really important to think about where are the points of contact and distinction between mentoring and coaching. I see them a lot of ways of having some connectivity. It is not totally binary. There's a fluctuation between them, but starting with distinctions and then seeing similarities, I think can be very helpful. So I had sent that paper ahead of some of those comparisons. Wanted to see what you thought of those. Anything stand out as you looked at that? the differences between mentoring and coaching.
I think the distinctions were helpful, especially in terms of kind of setting up expectations for the
Mhm.
relationship and kind of providing kind of boundaries.
Okay. Anything else?
That I've had with our guys with LAMP students, there
Mhm.
seems to be kind of a mix of those expectations. I found the clarity very, very encouraging. I'm going to use these.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with James. Sort of like when we were in college, learning what Christian dating means, we would say, you know, have you had the DTR conversation? Define the relationship, you know? And this is sort of the equivalent of that in different ways.
Mhm.
And having a working definition helps people to say, okay, exactly what are we doing? Because you may say you're the mentor and that person's the mentee. They could be using that word in a way, and you could be using that word in a way, but isn't, you know, fully what you want it to be. At least you're working off the same definition that you can then sort of mix and work with. So there's sort of you know, there's, you know, that you can work from to kind of help the relationship, to steer the relationship.
Mhm. There have been times with the guys are in my cohort that I'm mentoring, when in particular, you know, we'll talk in general forms of what's going on in their different internships, their experiences. One guy in particular was having specific struggles in carrying out this plan or creating a plan and carrying it out. And I said, well, look, why don't we do this? You know, rather than, you know, I kind of explained, I'm switching my hats. I've been a mentor. We're talking, how's it in this more general sense? Now let's get technical. And so we will set up 1 hour once a week for the next 4 or 6 weeks. I'm just going to call and we're going to work through a plan and set goals and doing SMART goals. You know, is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it actionable? Is it time sensitive? You know, that type of thing. And I coached him through it. It was a different, you know, I said, we're not changing our relationship, but I'm putting on a different hat. And so seeing that and knowing that, I think is really a helpful thing. One way to that this material, you know, putting them next to each other is, here you have this sense of the sorry, get this thing down further. Whereas, you know, mentor really, these, you know, understand these are not binary, they're on a spectrum, but by and large, a mentor is more relational and more life specific. A coach is more issue specific. They may care about what's happening in your life, but they're looking at coach is going to work in a specific area. And you think even in the context of athletics, and it's fascinating, the higher caliber of an athlete you are, the more coaches you have, not the less. You just don't have coaches when, you know, you're in little league, and by the time you get to the pros, you don't need one. So you think of, well, the example we often used, we can't use right now for it because he's in the hospital, but Tiger Woods, he had multiple coaches for different parts of the game. And they were specific to certain issues, but they're more task related. The mentor, yeah, there's information, it can be a bit more directive. The mentor has the opportunity to take on a bit more leadership and just saying, you go down this path, you're going to be a wreck. This isn't healthy. A mentor can, because it's relational, can sometimes should be able to have those more hard conversations. A coachee, often the coachee identifies the issues to be addressed. At times, the distinction has been made that the mentor pours in, the coach pulls out what's already there. And there, I think there can be some validity to that. The mentor relationship often is more indefinite. It's free form, and I would say, should not be monetary. You can't pay a mentor. Now, there are certain places that talk about hiring mentors, and I understand that. But in our context, whereas the coach is a set time, it's a paid service. Yesterday, I had a meeting with my coach, and we meet once a month for an hour. And we were off, and then I got the bill or reminder actually paying for next month. And that's fine. We have a contract. It's a contractual relationship. You can't do that with a mentor. It changes what the relationship is a lot. And then too, as I somewhat saying there, the mentor pours into the person what they need to move forward. The coach more often draws out what can be there, or you would hope would be there. So that's the kind of the spectrum of looking at it that I think can be helpful as well. Again, you can put other things on that spectrum: teacher, counselor, all of those are part of that relationship. And there are different hats we all wear in our relationships. Mentoring is one task, one tool that we're doing. Are you all with me? Some screens have gone blank. I'm afraid it's my internet here. I'll have to work on that.
So the coach, the way you're describing coach, is very, very different than a pro football coach. Here he has great power. He decides the questions and the answers and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So you're using it the way we're using more and more, and the coach be like your illustration of the coach in the city, but the coach is more deciding where we're going to, and I know they really do overlap a lot, and but yeah, that was helpful, and it still seems pretty nebulous in many ways to me.
It is. It's just I've been in too many situations where they use the terms interchangeably, and then they start demonstrating what I see as the coaching we do for pastors. And I said, no, let's see things a bit broader here so that we can flex a bit more. Having agility in what we're doing, I think, is an important part of the process. And again, and you're right, when we use the word coach, if we're thinking purely professional, and certainly, the head coach rules. And at times the other coaches, if it's a, quarterback, he has a passing coach and, things like that. It's going to be a little bit different, but the coaches we have, if those have been trained by, Tom Wood and CMM or some of the other organizations of coaching, in some ways can feel a bit more like a counselor. What do you want to talk about today? But the coach, unlike a counselor, is going to, okay, so here's your issue. So I'm going to talk to you and help you work through this. Not trying to provide. In some ways, counseling is more often talking about what has occurred in the past that's affecting the present. A coach is hearing what's in the present. How do you move to the future? That's one way counseling and coaching has often been distinguished. Again, we fluctuate. When I'm counseling somebody, I'm hearing about the past. We're trying to get a sense of equilibrium, if you will, in the present. Sometimes I then say, okay, well, how's it going to work? The next time you go visit your in-laws, what's going to happen? We're working the future. Now I'm actually starting to coach in a certain way. Those are not necessarily hard and fast rules, but if we think in those categories, I think we can approach those things. Whereas mentoring initially is not even talking issue specific. Mentoring a couple, let's say, I'm doing this off the top of my head, so this may or may not work. I think of premarital counseling sometimes to be more mentoring than coaching or really counseling, because they haven't faced the issues yet. So I'm going to kind of mentor them through. Let's talk about what happens when you have children. How are you going to discuss and decide these things? It's not necessarily issue specific. They're not facing it then and there. We're talking about the what ifs. We're developing those character skills of communication in marriage that are not always specific. And so what I'd like to see is, as leaders in discipling people, is again just having some different tools, figuring out the different questions to ask, and having, it's kind of that proverbial wisdom of knowing what to say, when to say it, how to say it. There are times we need just to say, stop it, you're an idiot, and you're going to destroy people if you keep doing this, because we got to warn them. There are other, and hopefully that's not too often. There are other times in which it is going to be more, life on life relational. How's it going in these circumstances? And we may not necessarily need to give them the skills to approach these things, but give them the hooks on which to hang. That's sometimes what mentoring does. You haven't gone through it yet, but here are the hooks. And that's why in those mentoring stages of formation, development, renewal, by the time we get to renewal, we usually know what those hooks are. That doesn't always mean we know how to deal with them. So that's why it's more facilitating reflection, conversation in a more relational kind of context. Any other thoughts?
Hey, Chris?
Yeah.
I thought that the distinctions were very helpful, that, particularly for a pastoral context, which, I'm in, dealing with men who are preparing for pastoral ministry. So as pastor, I do wear those different hats, mentor, coach, counselor, and being able to discern which hat is appropriate. So it was a very helpful exercise.
Yeah. And, in a week or two, Andy, when Sam and I and you get together, wherever that is, that's where we can get real specific. How will this work in your context with the people you're working with? And hopefully that'll be helpful too. Good.
Great.
All right. Yeah, and one of the things, again, I'm thinking in the context in which I'm doing in Wisconsin, this role of a mentor, it helps as I often serve as an advocate for our guys that are coming through. Most of my guys, or all my guys, are in formation. In our context of pastoral development, if the old kind of snarky saying is, to be under care is to be overlooked. They don't have a voice in the presbytery. And so what my role with those guys as their mentor is to come alongside them and help them through the process. So when they come to the credentialing part of the whole process, our guys coming under care to be licensed, they have no voice. They don't have a place in the court. I hate to use the term sometimes, but that's what it is. And so my job as someone working with them is to help advocate. So we've had some guys that have at times gotten beat up a little bit in credentialing, and part of it is that's called PCA hazing. You've got to endure the whole process to be able to get through, and not entirely bad, but it can be abused. And so there have been times, guys, they've spent, the committee spent an hour on one topic, and it's just because it was a hobby horse for members of that committee. And one of my sayings is, if we bring guys in to be credentialed and have I frozen? Give me a thumbs up.
You're okay. You're okay.
Good.
We can
All right.
hear you. You're freezing sometimes, but we can.
Your video,
Okay.
video.
Yeah, if the video freezes, that's that's fine as long as it's not my voice. I'll do that. Hopefully that might help the bandwidth. But I'll end with this, and we can end. But
I was really enjoying some of the spots where you were freezing though, Chris. I mean, it was comical.
yeah.
We got some of.
Well, I have Dan on my screen is laughing, so he's in a constant state of good humor, I see. But no, so I've been able to go to the committee and just say, this is not healthy. This isn't right. I know it's your concern. Oh, what I was saying is, if our candidates look like us, talk like us, and went to one of our seminaries that we like or tolerate, they're okay by and large. But if you change any one of those factors, all of a sudden they're going to have a tough time. And some of it's human nature. It's part of the fall. And so my job is to help ameliorate those distinctions, because the mentor is a voice to the person and for the person. I serve as an advocate. And because of my age, increasing gray hair, and I don't know if my increasing girth is part of it or not, but there is that gravitas in the presbytery. And that's part of what a mentor does. They can come along and speak into that person's life and into the process. And I think that's an important thing, especially in the context of the PCA, if we're going to see greater diversity and better health as we move forward. So, all right. Any other questions?
I have a question. Do you generally think younger folks, 25 to 35, 40, 35, are more open to mentoring by older people? I think that they are, because so many, higher percentage didn't have a father, or missed someone else to kind of be a mentor, coach, father, counselor,
Yeah.
teacher. But what's the school book answer on that? Are they
Yeah,
more open, less open, or
yeah,
what?
again, anecdotally, my personal experience, I don't know if I said this last week, was for boomers, for my generation, spiritual maturity was self-sufficiency. I'm finding more millennials seeing spiritual maturity as interdependency. The desire for community is much stronger. The wanting of real authenticity and transparency is stronger. And so if the mentor doesn't come across as the authority, so if someone my age comes in as the authority and this is the way it is, bucko, and especially if I start telling millennial jokes, that doesn't cut it. But if I come up and again, I'm not buddy with it, because I'm the age of their fathers now. One of the first guys out of our program, coming through our program, is my son, my youngest son. So yeah, they're all my kids now. They're younger than my kids, which is great. But it is, I'm not the authority, hard, fast authority. This is the way it is. But I am saying, look, I've got 30 years, 40 years experience under my belt in ministry. So let's talk, share stories, and usually share stories of my own weakness and struggles, that type of thing. It goes a long way. And a lot of the guys have said they like their supervising pastor, the pastor they're serving. I call them the supervising pastor in their internship, but they don't have the guy doesn't have the time. And he's doing a lot. I mean, some of our guys in our presbytery, they're not large churches. They've got 2 or 3 interns, and they meet with them professionally, task-oriented. But yeah, I'm finding that they do. Now, some of the guys in our presbytery aren't interested in being part of the cohort, and that's okay. They also don't get some of the financial advantages. And in every situation, they don't go through the credentialing process as well. Because they don't have that voice helping them through the process. Part of what I do, I'm doing it less right now because of time, but I mentor my guys for licensure and ordination. I've done it. I've been on credentials committee for 30 years. I kind of know the questions. I don't help them cheat. But if they pay me a lot of money, like the Hollywood types, no, that's not true. They get a sense. They have someone walking them through it, and they feel accepted and such. So yeah, I see a much higher rate, because I didn't have this coming through the process. The refrain that my wife always said when I did church planting was, "Isn't there somebody you can talk to?" And I always said, no. I mean, I called people and they were nice because they're Presbyterians, you know. They weren't necessarily kind, in that it just didn't go anywhere. And so I see a greater interest. So, well, good. Well, very good. Well, thanks a lot, guys, gals. Appreciate it. We'll be back next week, hopefully with a better internet connection.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
And as always, if you
Thank
have any
you.
questions, shoot me an email or a text and we can talk.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Lord
Thank
bless.
you, Chris.
Bye.
All right. Thank you.